Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's edition of View Matters, View Talks. I'm very glad to have all of you here for this great event. It's a great event because, first of all, it's a great series. And secondly, it's a great topic. And thirdly, it's a great speaker. So, nothing better, actually. So, what we will hear about today is the sustainability story. But let me briefly start by introducing the speaker first a little bit. Professor Franziska Weder is researching, writing, and teaching in organizational communication and public relation, and with a specific focus on this topic, on sustainable communication and corporate social responsibility. Big topics of today, even bigger topics of tomorrow. She's with us now here at VIU, but before joining us, the Department of Business Communication, Franziska was an associate professor at the University of Queensland. And then from Australia to Austria, you came to Klagenfurt here in our country. And while being there and early on, you worked also as a guest professor at many renowned institutions, namely University of Alabama, University of Waikato in New Zealand, the RMIT in Melbourne, Australia, and other universities. She is outgoing chair and educational fellow of the International Environmental Communication Association, and she also collaborates, obviously, with many international researchers, as you can see from her CV, in these areas in communication on sustainability, environmental, and other issues, namely researchers in Macedonia, Poland, Slovenia, and also overseas, US, Australia, New Zealand. Now, of course, for communication and media scholars, topics of our day are also stories. They are stories which are to be told, and that, of course, must sit alongside the typical angle we usually look at, the science, the technology, business, and other disciplines. And combine that with storytelling and with shaping our reality via the power of language, which is a topic I, as a law scholar, are very much aware of, because that's basically what we do. We change reality by language. Well, of course, I've lost the thread, but anyway. So the great issue is changing reality via language. And this is, I think, has been a great part of your career doing that, focusing on the various communication strategies you can use, focusing on ways to creatively disrupt our reality and to bring about change, both on an individual and on an organizational level. So you might say it's all talk, no action. But of course, you could turn that around as well and say talking is action. And I think that is the first thing you will want to tell us. I mean, you told me, to be honest. But so talking is action. Communication, language, and the stories are also essential to change and shape the reality, to help us, to help humans making sense of this world, and to question the way we perceive the reality, and thereby changing the reality as such as well, our social reality. And that is creating those new norms which hopefully will help us to create a socio-ecological transformation. Now, today, she will present her thinking about the emergence and manifestation of the sustainability story, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Please, Franziska, the floor is yours.
I know you are here because you want to hear the S word. Of course, the S word, sustainability. So this is why we're here and what brought us together. And I'm very happy to share with you a couple of thoughts, a couple of emotions, and hopefully a couple of cracks that maybe disrupt a bit your understanding of sustainability and normal. My big question that drives all my research and my teaching is the question of what or how to communicate about sustainability. And the second aspect is even more important. How can we communicate for sustainability, for transformation? And this is related to the second question, the question of what is the role of organizations in this game? What is the role of organizations in co-creating the sustainability story? Let's have a look around us, everyone. There's a tiny little card on your seats. And if not, have a look. There are a couple more in the first row that everyone is always scared to sit in. And yes, sustainability is all around us. Seriously, sustainability is all around us. Sustainability is omnipresent in politics. The Sustainable Development Goals are still the guiding framework for policies, for agendas, for conferences, for stakeholder dialogues, and of course for think tanks on a national, on an international, but also on a regional level. Today, new sustainability or sustainable cities are imagined, and even smaller communities or municipalities try to be sustainable and try to participate in what we call the socio-ecological transformation process. Sustainability is all around us, especially in a business context, from an economic perspective. Corporates started in the 1990s to report about their feeling about this global warming thing that suddenly emerged and got more present. And they started to report in their environmental reporting. And they strengthened their efforts, realizing their responsibility towards the society in the early 2000s, in the first decade of the 2000s with their CSR reporting. And we are now in an age where it's highly regulated and corporates need to report about their sustainability-related behavior, their activities, and all their processes and procedures. And, yay, we have a new acronym, ESG, the Environmental and Social Governance Perspective. And this is now used to make business more accountable, to really put it into numbers and not just talk about their activities and their processes and what has changed, but really to not just get the license to operate, but to have some facts and figures and, as said, to be accountable. Sustainability is all around us, especially at a university. It's also around us in schools. And here's one example from the University of Queensland, where I pretty much just arrived from in July last year. This university celebrates their sustainability week with vegan food trucks and some amazing beeswax workshops and recycling quizzes. Other universities already have developed something like a sustainability strategy, and they applied the strategy. And even beyond those strategies, we do have networks that universities get engaged in. One example is the Engage EU network, where the VU participates and gets engaged, all related to a global mindset and sustainability as the core issue. Sustainability is all around us, also from a cultural perspective. It's around us in other social systems, not just culture, but also in sport. Here's one example of Reading FC, a soccer club in the UK, that shows their stripes and added global warming data to their uniform. And lastly, of course, sustainability is all around us on an individual level. We all try to be good. We all try to bring our own bag when we go shopping. And of course, we use a lot of other social representations to frame our individual activities and our individual action to be more or less sustainable. And we try to get more or less active or even activist. However, quite often we don't do that well. Quite often we need to harmonize our dissonances because we can't always be sustainable. We need to harmonize our feelings of anxiety or fear or just being very helpless. So we either change our actions, we challenge our beliefs by allocating responsibility to someone else, or maybe upper level organizations, corporates, the government, politics, or we start to reframe our individual actions, which I was lucky enough to research in a project with wonderful colleagues who are in the room today. So what happened here? How can we trace back how and why the S word has been normalized in all our areas, in all the areas of our life, in all areas of the society? How did the term emerge? How did it manifest? How did it get institutionalized on an organizational level? And in so many societal arenas and discourses. But also, how can we do better? And what role does strategic communication play here? Today, I want to take you on a journey. The journey of the evolution of the sustainability story. Evolution is a pretty big word. I think I can rely on some common understanding here what evolution means. It's basically a process. It's a process of formation or growth. And it's definitely a certain development over a certain time. Evolutionary theory seeks to describe this development and the characteristics of this development, all the dimensions of increased variation, inheritance. It's all happening within a certain time span. And then, of course, we talk a lot about adaptation processes. Evolutionary theory also seeks to understand this principle of selection, of doing one thing or keeping one behavior or norm or pattern and dismissing others. Important for us, tracing back the sustainability story or the evolution of the sustainability story is something that I want to follow and share my thinking with you about one specific perspective in evolutionary theory, which is called niche theory. And this fits quite well because it describes that evolution is not just happening. It always happens at the intersection of an organization or an organism or a certain species and its environment. So it also happens at the intersection. What does that mean? First of all, it is really important and such a great concept for us, thinking about organizations in this society, and this is a kind of core thinking that I know I share with a lot of colleagues here in the room, trying to understand organizations as a certain structural complex that is embedded in the society or in specific societal systems. And interestingly, these organizations are linked or embedded in the society through or via communication. Because organizations, as we know, there's a lot of communication happening within organizations. We know that. We experience it on an everyday basis. But there's also a lot of communication that organizations send out to their stakeholders, send out to their target audiences or publics or however we want to frame them. But there's also a lot of communication in the organizational environment, so in the environment of this species, these organizations. So niche theory, being a theory that explains change happening at the intersections of organizations and their environment, fits quite nicely to further explore what the evolution or the emergence of the sustainability story and sustainability communication as a niche. So my thinking is further based on something that is talked about in cultural evolutionary theory. So you can already see I'm talking a bit about society here and social systems and organizations and stakeholders and networks and stuff. And I sneaked in a few words that will pop up again, which are terms like culture or patterns of behavior or norms that somehow guide or direct our individual but also organizational action. I work with this concept of niche theory from this culture perspective because, as I said, it tells us that individuals and organisms, and therefore organizations, actively construct important components of their specific environment. But it also tells us that there's something that is called an evolutionary response. So apparently there's something happening in this niche as well, or in the society. Therefore, I started to conceptualize niche construction as something that happens through communication. As a communication scholar, I'm really interested in that, and I'm wondering if we shouldn't differentiate sustainability communication. Because if sustainability communication over those decades, from the first environmental reporting to then the CSR reporting and then now the sustainability and ESG reporting, if this communication endeavor or this kind of effort that organizations put in sustainability communication, if this created a niche for sustainability communication, that's great. But what we predominantly see is a lot of communication of sustainability. Like we've seen all those corporates and all the products we get in touch with, all the examples that I tried to start with. We can see that there is a niche for communication of sustainability, for organizations communicating about their sustainability efforts. Sustainability is all around us, and it even tells us that our beer is sustainable now. Great, cheers. But if we understand this increase in reporting that KPMG and all their friends always kind of measure and tell us about, this massive increase of reporting, of communication, of sustainability, then I'm asking for what's next? What about the evolutionary response? Before we go down that pathway and try to understand better what is happening as a response, I just want to use one other perspective, one other way to look at it. And this is something that is familiar to those of you who read something about discourse theory, because there is a lot on the so-called normalization. So what does that mean, normalization? If something gets normal, when do we feel, oh, okay, that's normal for me now? When do we think, yep, that's pretty much all around us, that's all around me? It happens along those steps. And this is what we can see and follow back or trace back very nicely in terms of communication of sustainability that happened over those years. Because now there are new rules, new regulations, a high degree of institutionalization of sustainability in the corporate and the organizational world, which validates their behavior, which validates their increased and more professionalized sustainability communication, which then leads to more and more organization reporting, more and more organizations putting sustainability and net zero and CO2 emissions and reduced CO2 emissions on their products and on their services, and then something becomes mainstream, something becomes common thinking. So this is how something normalizes, because, as I said, it's now all around us. Corporates did very, very well in normalizing sustainability around us. But I said there's always a but. There's always a But what about us? And as I said before, it's sometimes tricky, as we know. What about this evolutionary response? Like, what is happening in those systems? Did corporates actually stimulate and even more drive what we call socio-ecological transformation with all their communication of sustainability, with all their reporting? What is happening in the media? What is happening in those public discourses? What is happening in social media? What is happening in this world? What is happening in this space here, which I will call communication about sustainability? One way to look at the evolutionary response would be to look at change behavior, to understand, okay, did we actually change? Is there just a niche now for the reporting, or are there actually changes? And what about the people? And sustainability is well used in marketing, and it's a word with a big job to do in that space. And there are high hopes from corporates invested in this word, but to be honest, to date, the approach has had limited success. If you look at those numbers, especially the second one, you can see that only 19% of the people we surveyed in a collaboration with Accenture, they say, well, corporates inspired me to live sustainably by their brand messaging and by their advertisements. 20%. That's not too much if we started with, hey, there's so much communication of sustainability that created this beautiful niche for sustainability communication. 20% of people feeling stimulated or kind of inspired by all the marketing, that's not what I would call an evolutionary response. So my feeling is that we can't really see or say that our cultural and behavioral patterns actually changed, that they actually have been disrupted in a way that they changed. And therefore we need to explore new or alternative ways how a new norm like sustainability can be cultivated, kind of more bottom-up. You know, that we get used to those new patterns, not by being told, not by, hey, have a sustainable beer, but maybe in a different way. And this is what I want to share with you, some thinking or some thoughts about what role communication plays if we think about this cultivation process, how a new norm establishes in a different way. Therefore, I would love to introduce a third dimension or a third way to look at sustainability communication, which is communication for sustainability. Communication that actually has this footprint, communication that actually creates a new norm by cracking the existing norms, by cracking our existing normal. And therefore, again, we need to complement what niche theory and those kind of established big theories offer us with some nice communication theory. And here I want to add, or I want to kind of turn the process around. So for a cultivation of sustainability bottom up, we need pioneers. We need those very first people and we need those very first organizations that make an issue out of something, that are not happy with just their sustainable beer and their tiny little beautiful tote bag and their avocado sandwich. Cheers. And those pioneers, so if you have someone or one organization that goes beyond the normal, that allows other people and other organizations to be not quite as extreme, but follow their path. So that gives other people the permission to change or to behave differently because someone else was already pretty extreme. And if more and more people then fill this space, so if more and more people kind of follow this permission to change, to do things different, to follow different behavior patterns, then, of course, we will reach a tipping point, this critical point of transformation where a new pattern suddenly becomes a new social norm, which then allows politics and institutional networks to license or to kind of change the rules and then therefore license those new behavior patterns. What does that now mean to be a pioneer? And who are the ones we speak about? So a pioneer, and thanks for the introduction, has something to do with communication again, and more particular with storytelling. Because yes, it's the stories, it's the narratives that not just we as communication scholars, but I think all of you know that in these narratives, the stories that we tell, this is a very crystal clear version of our norms, of what we think is normal. The stories that we tell are those examples, they express our behavior patterns and what we think is normal. It includes some morality, it includes some causality, further explored in lots of different communication theories. Storytelling is something that is very human. Why are those stories and narratives so important? Well, just kind of two little things here. A narrative is what I would call a communicative footprint. It is exactly the tiny little construct that we need to understand the evolutionary response. Because we do not just want to explore the niche of sustainability communication or the niche that has been created in terms of all the reporting and the highly regulated communication of sustainability. But we are furthermore now interested in what are those communicative footprints, what is this evolutionary response, and therefore we need to understand the narratives as those hidden organizational structures, those kind of tiny little structures in every conversation. And this is in various disciplines also related to this idea of sense-making. Because we understand the world in the way we understand the world, because we make sense of the world in every interaction, in every communication process that we are embedded in. Every example, every story we hear is this tiny little bit that helps us to understand what is happening in a wider societal context. So every conversation, on an individual level, within organizations and beyond, every conversation is sense-making in action. Every conversation is a process of narrativization. And therefore, kind of going back to this idea of niche construction through communication, of course, if we can change the narratives or those dominant narratives, great. If we crack them up, we can create much more opportunities to tell new stories and to actually communicatively have an impact on what we call the socio-ecological transformation. The only thing is, we need to dare. We need to dare to be a pioneer. We need to dare to crack up the norm and what we think is like, oh, that's regulated anyway. Great, tick, tick, tick the boxes. We need to dare to be a provocateur. And that's the main difference to what is out there talking about sustainability communication so far. So thinking in evolutionary theory terms, sustainability communication needs to be understood as this cultivation process that has a cultural impact, and narratives are those communicative footprints. Let's have a very quick look into the narratives that are out there at the moment. We can see some bits from the media out there that is very kind of negative. Okay? Bad stories are still good stories. So, climate crisis. And then we have some example of the success stories of the communication of sustainability, saying the greatest contribution to sustainable development is through our offerings. We will transform, we will mitigate, we will adapt. And of course, it's economic reasonable to be sustainable. We want to innovate. Transformation means innovation and optimization. So these are, the green ones, are the key narratives that are out there at the moment. But as you can see, in my research I took the effort to explore some other narratives that are not out there that much, neither in the media, nor in corporate reporting, on the websites and all the corporate material. It is an interesting job to think about those narratives, and of course it would be an amazing job to further think about, okay, where do those narratives come from? At least the green ones we can say. At the very end of this presentation, not the very end, kind of getting to the end, I would love to develop a bit of a new perspective on that helps us to imagine not only the key role of strategic communication in this, but also to kind of think a bit about our role as a storytelling animal in this definitely transforming society. So let's try to develop a new perspective and answer the question of how to dare something new. So if we assume that narratives are those communicative footprints, they do represent a very vital source to identify, to self-identify, to find one's place in the society or in a tribe, in a community of practice. Narratives are the source that raises recognition, and of course narratives and stories can mobilize. So, suggestion, we work with those 4 ideals or ideal typical narratives that find application a lot in arts, in history, in philosophy, and many disciplines of humanities. Let's build on those very distinct narratives or plots that every one of you knows, because those narrative structures come along with a lot of specific frames, specific structures. Let's play a bit around with those kind of 4 distinct plots: the tragedy, the comedy, the romance, and the satire. And when we have a look at those narratives, those sustainability narratives that I tried to list before, The more established ones fit either in the tragedy, especially the media ones. It's an extra effort, it's an investment in our future, and of course the risk, the ecological crisis, insecurity. By the same time, we see a bit of romance. If you read the CEO messages of corporate reports these days, it's really nice, it's lovely. We had an amazing discussion this morning about how beautiful those kind of and aspirational speech still is. We read a lot about justice and diversity. We read a lot about success and change and innovation. And this is what romance, or these romantic narratives, stand for. Development. And there's a hero. And he's on a journey of maturation. He's overcoming some behavioral patterns and potentially changing the destiny of all of us. As you can see, there are two narratives that are apparently quite empty for now. And if we try to kind of, again, go back to those key narratives that I've found in some media analysis and text analysis, we can see that in those more comedy and satire, like in this space of the two other narratives, we don't see that much communication. So we have a very strong degrowth narrative, tragedy. We have a very strong growth narrative represented in the corporate communication. But by the same time, we do not see a lot around the so-called post-growth narrative. We don't see many stories that give us an alternative, that crack our normality, that crack our understanding of the world. We don't see a lot of narratives that offer us a contradiction or an irritation. So that brings me to the very last question. If we know what kind of alternative narratives would make actually a really good communicative footprint, and we need that, we need this kind of relocation, and we need to get a bit out of the niche. One last question needs to be answered, and this is the question, who's going to do that? Who's responsible for that? I'm very grateful that we have people in the room who would probably say immediately, journalists. Journalists are the one, and we have this like long tradition of Zeitungswissenschaften, Publizistik, communication sciences, media sciences, or media studies. The journalists are really good storytellers. And if we interview them, which we did, they say, yeah, storytelling is my core business. But it's not just the journalists and not kind of the increasingly fragmented field of journalism. It's also PR. It's also strategic communication and those amazing public relations experts that are also in the room. They could definitely be a bit more provocative. Internal business communication, organizational communication, this is where the cultivation of sustainability can take its starting point. In new conversational spaces where people start to not just say, yep, let's do a nice little recycling thing, but also negotiate what sustainability actually means for this specific organization or for this specific company. It's relevant for family business in particular, like what does sustainability mean for them? And this needs to be negotiated and not just taken from the SDGs or some beautiful, colorful, amazing guidelines here. And I would also go beyond and say, well, we also need artists. And of course, we need us, teachers, scholars, researchers. And lucky enough, There's a new species coming up. And this is just the starting point for just some amazing research that I just started here now, to create a better understanding of how can we somehow categorize this influx of new roles, from sustainability manager to CSR manager to CSR reporting expert to sustainability marketing manager. It's amazing. Like one weekend of looking into the job portals gave us 600 job announcements in this space, all about CSR and sustainability. And the good thing is, apparently, that's not just something that is happening within a corporate context. Apparently, those very new roles are more established and much more institutionalized than we actually think. And I'm very happy for you to pass it around. Here we have seriously, the Jane Goodall Institute collaborated with Mattel, and they have a new set of 4 Barbies. That one, she's a bit, sorry, we have only boys. So she looks a bit played with. So she is a renewable energy engineer, activist, bioscientist. I know, our Barbies. My very first set of Barbies, I have to admit. And the Chief Sustainability Officer. Seriously. Like, I leave it here, everyone who wants to have a play, you can come up and use it. There are some tiny little things in here, those items they use. Like, she has a tiny little iPad and a fancy phone. The renewable energy engineer has a tiny little kind of map thing that shows some solar panels. She has a little board for her protesting. So I leave it here, and I'm very happy for you, as I said, to have a little chat about those Barbies, and of course, beyond that, about sustainability, the story about sustainability, or the story of sustainability, how it developed, how it emerged. As said, you are here not just because there will be Barbies to play with, but also because of the S word, because it is interesting for you. But I don't want to let you go without turning this tiny little green card around. And this is definitely not English. Der Plauderer. Der Plauderer is someone who dares to tell stories, someone who dares to bring in new narratives. And so I can only leave you today with a tiny little appeal. Be a storyteller. Dare for the new narratives in your tribe, in your communities of practice. Be a Plauderer. And this is pretty much it. But I don't want to end this presentation. I know, nearly there. Before we come to the questions, and we have enough time for questions, and then there will be food and drinks outside, and we can further be Plauderer and plaudern and interact. Before we come to the questions, of course, I really want to say thank you. This is definitely the most diverse audience I've ever had. Challenging for sure. It's full of emotions. It's definitely full of gratitude. There are so many people that mark such an important part. of my life, and I'm deeply grateful for all the guidance, for the friendship, for the company, the support, for all the challenges and the critique. And I'm very grateful for all the love that I'm gifted with. And it would be far too long to say thank you to a lot of people here. I'm just capable to say thank you to the most wonderful person for me in the room, in the most Australian way I can do. Mate, I love you. Thank you. So there will be a microphone kind of wandering around. So any questions? Any ideas? Any thoughts? Dung, 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 dung. You go first. The microphone is coming.
First of all, thank you very much. It's very interesting. But there was one concept that was not quite clear to me, and this is all tied to this meta-narrative that we have within our society, which is tied to predictability, which for me is the exact opposite of this emergent component that you talked about, specifically tied to the niche development. And so on the one hand, we have this message constantly about predictability, but we know that doesn't work within sustainability. So how do we round these edges?
Yeah, that's an amazing question, and it brings us pretty much back to a very basic question: what is sustainability and how we treat it? So sustainability, if it's kind of about, like if we look at it from an economic perspective, it tells us something about how resources should be used so that we have some resources in the future. But if sustainability gets this additional normative character, if it's a principle that guides all action, then it goes deeper. And then I think it loses, it's interesting with the predictability. So I think it loses the predictability, but by the same time it gives a lot of stability. Sometimes in my classes I try to compare sustainability with democracy, something we all agree on. It's a normative principle that helps us, that guides us, that at least works as a bit of a moral compass in terms of, okay, this is good behavior and this is bad behavior. Sustainability, from my perspective, has the potential to be something like a universal value. But then we don't talk about predictability or anything like this anymore, because predictability is something else. Predictability is like at the end of a causal chain of argumentation. So if you know what I mean? So that would be my take on it. It depends on how you approach sustainability. If it's a principle that gives us an idea about how organizations and the society and then individuals embedded in those organizations, how they use those structures. And if we make this highly institutionalized and regulated, then I think it's possible to create what you said is predictability.
But that could possibly be an oxymoron with all this regulation. If we were to look at predictability, if the polar opposite was uncertainty, right?
Yep.
Then we understand that within this evolution narrative, that uncertainty is a big part of it, because we as human beings there are things that we cannot understand, and we have to accept them. Acceptance being another part of this narrative, right?
Yep.
So how do we get companies that are getting this meta-narrative of predictability to react in a non-predictable way?
This is something I think, like everyone who works in the space of sustainability, strategy development, sustainability consulting is, you have a couple of experts pretty close to you, that is the big point. And this is also very important for us as teachers within universities, but also in schools. How can we make people courageous and give them this idea of stability so that they can deal with the high complexity and the insecurity? So I wouldn't say that insecurity or complexity is per se bad or wrong, because it's all there. And it's a good thing. What is missing is that people can't cope with that. So I'm not quite sure if predictability or stability or kind of getting all this anxiety away, if this is really the path to go. I think it is about kind of recreating kind of structures and, like, I very briefly talked about tribes or communities of practice, and I think this is really kind of a small-scale version, or a much smaller scale that we need to think about, because the big scale is too complex. But we can reduce the complexity by focusing on localities, by focusing on the communities of practice that everyone is embedded in, and say, okay, how do we deal with this complexity in this kind of small structure? And then kind of scale it up or apply it in my other communities of practice, in other tribes. So that would be my pretty idealistic but kind of idea here.
Thank you very much for this very touching and inspiring story you told us, Franziska. I have one very short question. What about Ken? What is his role
That is a really
in your
good
story?
question, I know. Very relevant. At least he's nominated for an Oscar, you know, Barbie's not. So Ken is not doing too bad here. Yeah, good, important point to further kind of elaborate on. It is highly critical. If you have a look at the Barbies, super critical from a diversity perspective, how they kind of pick those things. Really interesting to unpack them with kids who are much more innocent in using terminology that we wouldn't dare to use here. So it is a very legitimate question, especially for us as PR and Stratcom scholars, because PR has always been very female, and now we are kind of opening up here a new field of professions, excuse me. The big question will be, is this also a new field for kind of soft skills? It doesn't look like. So our main research question now in looking into those 600 whatever job announcement is to find and identify the skills that are required and where those jobs are located, because that's a crucial question. If it's an HR position, if it's a tech position, if it's an admin position, is it a comms role? Is it a communication role? So these questions will help us to then look at the skills, like what are these magic green skills that are now increasingly like turning into a bit of an elephant in the room because who's teaching them? And for us, a very important question is, what role do communication skills play for these jobs? For a sustainability reporting person, professional, they will play a role. What about the sustainability manager? What kind of role is that? Where is it located, in the C-suite or somewhere kind of more, yeah, well, please try to tick the boxes, otherwise give it to the rating agency. So, really important question. Sorry, maybe there are two questions right here in the... Did you want to ask a question? Sorry, yeah. You go first and then the ladies here.
Sorry, one more question from this side of audience. We asked about Ken already, and I would like to ask about what do you think about role of governmental institution, and how do how they can play in this competition versus corporates?
Yep. Yep. Great question. So political institutions or governmental institutions do play a very important role, and it kind of leads us a bit back to this normalization, cultivation, top-down, bottom-up processes. They do play a role in both processes. So they do play a role when we look at it from a normalization perspective, because they need to create the regulatory frameworks and say, hey, guys, EU Green Deal, this is what we do now. But by the same time, if we look at it from like bottom up, they are at the end, but they are there because if the tipping point is reached, if everyone kind of started to do things differently, it's important to institutionalize it. And here again, those institutions, broad term, kicks in. I'm not quite sure if it's just political institutions or if we're rather in the space of networks, collaborations, because again, transformation is nothing that one organization or one corporate or one person can do. And therefore it's good that if we speak of institutions or those networky structures here that manifest new ideas, new narratives, new perspectives, new behavioral patterns, new norms, then of course we need to broaden it up and say, great, there are networks like respect, there are networks that bring organizations together. Main point, again, I'm standing here as a communication scholar, as someone who's trained in and learned about how important conversations are and communication is. I'm standing here as someone who says it's not so much about who or which kind of institution. It's about the conversational space that is opened where people come together and start to talk about it and to negotiate it. Not to just say, yep, great, perfect, love it, but also to actually criticize things, to queer things, to really come in from the side, to crack up norms, and to be willing to do that, / to have the space for that. And here again, that's the job of those institutions, not so much to bring in more rules and regulations, but it's really about opening those spaces. Again, small scale within those organizations, but also on a larger scale within a larger region, country, depends. Cool. Oh no, she's naked. Why? Poor her.
The doll, you mean, right?
Put on more clothes. I'm not talking about you, Cassie. I'm talking about the poor bioscientist. But it's pretty hot out there, so.
Right, first of all, thanks for the mention about Ken, because I'm very curious about your research. Because at the Campus Wieselburg, where we have a Master in Green Marketing and Sustainability Communication, all of our students, our first semester students, are young ladies. And so what is going on here? I'm very curious. And why should it always be on the shoulders of the young ladies? But I'm curious about your thoughts on perhaps the R that we should perhaps be more talking about now, and that is regeneration. Do you think that organizations should be communicating rather for regeneration now, and that sustainability is now rather passé? What are your thoughts on that, Bridget? And by the way, we're all big fans of you, me and my students. Thank you.
Really interesting question about the concept of regeneration. And it leads us straight back to, we need to talk more about it. So I don't think that we need to get rid of the sustainability term, because there is more than a niche. It's good. And the redundancy of communication, the sheer mass of sustainability communication, has done a good job. Okay, it's good because it's there. This is why you guys here. Okay, the S word is there. And so I think it would not be, again, communication person speaking here, to replace it or to say, bleh, wicked term, language token, my feeling is, again, it's really about what do we mean when we say, when we communicate about or of sustainability? Like, what is the meaning? What is our understanding? And here it's really not about a replacement, it's about kind of maybe offering a bit more context when we communicate about sustainability. So one thing is to negotiate it, to open up those spaces and to talk about it. And it's something that happens within a teaching context a lot, that people bring in their different perspectives on that. But sustainability, and this is one interpretation, the idea or the concept of regeneration. And it's nothing, like, it's very complex and very clunky, and we still have the challenges from a communication perspective that sustainability is still mostly seen as the green part of the responsibility. There's still a lot of people who kind of have those kind of associations towards tree huggers and knitted jumpers, and like it's still full. Like, if you look at the social representations of sustainability, really interesting. Goes far beyond the tote bag, far beyond buying regional or seasonal food. So therefore, I think it's even more relevant to keep the discussion going and to stimulate. So exactly what you did. What about regeneration? Good idea. Great. Need to talk about it. So while on the one hand, I never wanted to create the impression here that sustainability is this kind of hollow notion of, it is good, okay? Sustainability communication has created this niche, and that's good. However, thinking beyond, open up new spaces about what does the principle of sustainability mean? Is it a guiding principle for action? Under which conditions would it be a guiding principle of action for individuals and their behavior, but also for organizations as such in our society? That brings us to a much more granular understanding of what sustainability means, including regeneration, including restoration, and a lot of other R terms that are kind of meandering around here. So thanks, really important. Gabi.
Franziska, first of all, thank you. I'd like to add something, to continue what Kirsty said, and what you just mentioned. I'm still stuck with your premises. Mm-hmm. Because you focus very much on this communication efforts, departments, reporting, whatever they caused, and of course they did cause quite a lot, but still I have my doubts. Mm-hmm. When it comes to impact, when it comes to leverage. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, because I work more on the, let's say, the upper level, which is board, etc., and communication departments as well as sustainability departments, I always call it like an island somewhere out there, but the mainland is very different. Yeah. So how do we really get to the mainland? Yeah. And I mean, communicators, they are a corrective. I mean, we know that, but in theory, in communication theory, but in communication practice, very often it's really about in-out. So how can you really make an effort, or how can we really come to what you just mentioned before when you had the first discussion, to make it a universal principle, like justice, like freedom, whatever? Big question.
Big question. It's a question that sounds really familiar. Quite a while ago, when a couple of people in the room studied in Eichstätt, we had a seminar that was on public relations strategies. And the PR guru from BMW was there. And he was standing there and saying like, the PR department in the organigram was like somewhere there. And the same phenomena is what you just described. It's coming up again. Looking again, 10, 20 years back, CSR or sustainability agendas was something that probably the CEO chucked on the desk of his or her, his probably administration officer, saying, I think we need to do something about it. Someone else, like at golf, someone told me they are doing something, let's do something. And then the communication department picked it up, because it was a lot about reporting and putting some nice little things on the website. And now it's completely different, because it moved to a very different part of corporates, thinking about big corporates here. If we started to speak with people, and it's much, much more a task in the so-called administration, doesn't fit really well in English, I think it's the Verwaltung, and it is the same, but it's not somehow. So, excuse my German Verwaltung here, but it is somehow more at the core, because it's not just part of the external communication to keep some shareholders happy. It is more at the core, but it's definitely not yet in the C-suite. And it's here the path to go is to really compare with other countries. Because if you look what's happening in the United States, it's already different there. You do have the chief sustainability officer or even a chief diversity manager in the C-suite. So you do have it on a strategic level. However, I had a chat with a colleague from Portugal just recently. He was like, Franziska, I did all these like 500 interviews with CEOs in Portugal, and now I see something like sustainability manager. What's that? I never heard about it. I was like, oh, interesting. So nothing against Portugal if there are any Portuguese here, sorry for that. But it's his perspective. But I think it's very important to explore this space much more in terms of what are the roles, how are they designed in job applications, what skills are required, who actually takes those roles, how long do they stay? Is it Barbie or is it Ken? Really important question, but not to focus on like one country, because it might be very similar in this context, but also compare. And it is a very valuable comparison in this regards with the United States. Only in this regards.
I also have to say thank you. It was a great pleasure to hear you with this emotion, and also how you presented. I learned a lot. It was really fine. How do you see the future of sustainable communication? How do you feel with this EU ban about greenwashing?
Big question. This is the only question that I recently get from, from the media. Like, oh, Franziska, what do you think about the new greenwashing directive? And again, it's an interesting question. And there are some colleagues here, and we had this discussion at a different conference in October. Is the greenwashing discussion and everything that drives this discussion really bad? No, not from a discourse theory, or a discourse perspective, not from a communication perspective. The discussion is very healthy, it's really good. The more we talk about it, the better. So, yes, of course, I would never say this kind of guideline or regulation is bad or useless or whatever. Even the fact that it exists and suddenly people speak about it and they're like, I'm really happy that it exists, and they are kind of more and more organizations or specific behaviors that are made an issue out of. Great. So my stake on these kind of directives and the whole debate about greenwashing is good, it's important. Because as we know, even from kind of really old journalism communications theories, under the umbrella of scandal theories, that every scandal is really healthy for the society, because suddenly they need to kind of think about, okay, what do I think is good or bad behavior? They suddenly need to go back to their own morality and their own norms and have to think like, okay, do I really think that's bad? But when I look at it, and this kind of bringing in some morality, not in terms of this is what you need to do, but this is what you need to do, but bringing in morality in a way that people are woken up or thrown back to their own normative framework, saying like, and therefore I think this, like everything that is made an issue out of, great. Being in the very luxury position of an academic Who analyzes all the communication then? Great. Sorry, I probably messed up the first part of the question. Oh, the future. Oh my God. Well, there will be a Ken in the Barbie box. Really interesting. The future for me, sticking with this topic is, are they addressed again? Good. So the future kind of that I can focus on or want to speak of is that I'm very, very happy that we are not longer, like in the space of sustainability communication, we are not longer talking about this dichotomy between the media perspective, observing organizations doing stuff, and then the PR perspective, kind of sending all the information to the media or to their favorite journalists. This kind of duality breaks up. So we have this divergence in roles. Because people who study journalism then work as a freelancer and get some more money working for a PR agency. So this whole field is opening up. Web publisher, influencer, are they journalists? Are they PR people? Neither. So there is a lot happening in terms of communicator roles. And they are not necessarily just bound to one specific profession, being either journalist or PR, or strategic communication or marketing, like however you want to look at it. Instead, we have those kind of, at least the potential, that there are more roles who take a very active role in creating narratives, disseminating narratives, sharing narratives, or directing those narratives to a specific target audience. And I would include at least some of those roles that I listed here in the sustainability space. So that is something that I will definitely further observe, and that is something that I think of if you ask me for the future. Sustainability communication will definitely be much more than just a niche or just like one tiny little bit that organizations do if we apply this broader understanding to communication. If it's not just reporting, if it's not just this instrumental perspective on communication in terms of let's get an information across to a specific stakeholder. If it's more, if it's a conversational approach, if it's kind of a more critical approach in making an issue out of something in terms of sparking conversations, that's kind of, at least, like there's some future around here, part of my future, but it's that's kind of where I see a lot of development and a lot of potential when we think of sustainability communication. There were some questions over here, so we move over here. Yep, I don't, probably you.
More a statement. Since 2010, I have a photovoltaic plant on the roof. And in 2011, we paid 10 euros for electricity for the whole year. And since this time, I sold hundreds of photovoltaic plants. And what I'm missing is sustainability is extremely profitable. To invest in photovoltaic, maybe. Since 2015, I drive an electricity car. And with an electricity car, it's more profitable. And I would like to suggest we need not a lot of communication. We need sales representatives. They go to customer and sell their products. In 2022, I sold 100 photovoltaic plants in 8 months and about 30 by the first appointment. And we should train sales reps, and with sales, with a good sales force, we can change everything. Thank you.
Yeah. No worries.
Thank you very much, Franziska. Lots of food for thought and conversations. I'm delighted that your office is literally next to mine and we can continue the conversation. I guess my comment stroke question links to others that have been made by other speakers. as you know, my own background is not in Stratcom, but in CDS, Critical Discourse Studies. And from that perspective, we would ask perhaps primarily, or we would say, not that it's a story, but that it's only a story, and that we need to investigate and look very closely at what it is in the discourse that makes it only a story. For example, I mean, you talked about, you know, investigating what these sustainability managers are asked to do and who takes the jobs, etc. I saw one from Red Bull, and also, well, I wonder what sustainability story the eventual job holder is told to tell. Like, you know, aluminium cans are fantastic, they can be recycled endlessly, etc. And the other thing, really, I suppose, is more of a comment. Democracy as a principle that we all agree on, kind of thing. Well, democracy isn't just a mindset. In order for it to work, it needs to be backed up by hard institutional structures. You know, it's a system of governance and government. So there's kind of more to it. And if sustainability is just a mindset, we're not going to you know, will the stories save the planet? Just as democracy as a mindset is unlikely to lead to democratic systems in the full sense of the word.
Yeah. No, you speak, like, this calendar comes from, like, seriously, and this is exactly the critical point, because sustainability is not just the story. For now it is. It is told in, like, pretty much one or two specific ways. But my feeling is, if we talk more about it, if we bring in exactly the discourse in the idea of negotiation, of argumentation, it has the potential to go much deeper and to develop into something that is much, much more than tree hugging, wearing your tote bag. You know? So this is why I think, and this is something that will start or can start in business communication, in organizations, because we know a lot about the communication processes that are happening within organizations, and this is where the space can be created, and this is where those discussions can be trained, and or deliberations maybe a bit would be more suitable. So thank you. Yep.
Organizations always get divided in blue colors and white colors. And where do you think sustainability is really, let's say, they bring more efforts in, the blue colors or the white colors? Bottom up or top-down flow? Because sustainability are costs. Because when I think 15 years back, sustainability was known somehow in corporate social responsibility, incorporated somehow, but these are costs. So this is what I wanted to figure out. Do you have some talks with big companies as well as small, mid-sized enterprises to see where is this coming, the implementation coming from, top-down or bottom-up?
Very short answer to the second part of your question. For now, it's happening top-down. And it's not bad, again. It's good. So it is happening top-down, and there is, if you kind of unpack old business ethics literature, it's good because the CEO has to be there with his or her own value frameworks.
No money, no music.
Well, absolutely. So my feeling is that this goes really deep to a core of a lot of discussions. My feeling is that this is a discussion that there are many people here who deal with this kind of economic business ethics. What comes first question for years, for decades even, and who look into the space of like what kind of value frameworks fit together. Like this is really kind of good old business ethics, and I'm very happy to connect you with those people. My feeling is that not only the tummies in the first row are grumbling, so there is food outside, there are drinks outside. Is there one? Is there one specific question that that you want me to answer? Otherwise, I would say let's continue the chat and the conversations about enforced sustainability outside.